Hey, hey, welcome back to Cream City Dreams. I'm your host, Megan Schultz, and this is the podcast where I introduce you to incredible Milwaukee women who are living the dream, who are living into their dream, who are sharing that dream with the rest of us to give us a little nudge, to give us a gentle reminder that we indeed have permission to live into our dreams. Like today's guest, Ashley Jordan. She is the author of a new book, Unhappy Achiever, which was recently published and is available wherever you get your books. And we are going to talk about the story of this book and how it came to be. And indeed, dear listener, how it could benefit you. I have had authors on this podcast before. I've had children's book authors, cookbook authors, guidebook authors, and authors of many other papers, essays, stories. But this may be the first podcast where I am talking specifically about a newly released book that might be a great one for your shelf in 2025 as we start the new year. All right, let's dive right into this interview with Ashley Jordan. Today on the podcast, I have with me Ashley Jordan. She is the author of the recently published book, Unhappy Achiever, Rejecting the Good Girl Image and Reclaiming the Joy of Inner Fulfillment. And I'm excited to talk about the story and the process and everything about this book. I want to be sure, I don't want this interview to be the complete TLDR for the book so that listeners don't go out and buy it themselves. In other words, I don't want to give everything away in what we talk about, but I hope that it's okay that we talk about the process and the story behind it. So welcome, Ashley.
Thank you, Megan. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So this season 7, is all about women whose lives have been thrown a curveball or who have made a pivot or otherwise have changed somehow or in a big way, really, is kind of what I was thinking about as I envisioned this season, whether from a change or a decision that they made that happened that they chose for themselves or maybe something that happened to them, right? And after reading your book, I feel like this is very much your story, like you are an obvious candidate for this season. Would that be fair to say?
Yes. I've been on a fast and furious 4.5 year journey of personal growth, healing, and transformation. And it's a journey that has caused me to change every major aspect of my life in that time, with the exception of my 3 children. So I absolutely fit the theme this season, Megan.
Yes. And the title of your book is Unhappy Achiever. And you describe yourself, or maybe I should say your former self, as an unhappy achiever. Can you give us an idea of what that means? What did you mean by unhappy achiever?
Sure. So I think at some point, well, I know exactly, actually, at the age of about 38 years old, I realized that my entire life I had been going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. So early on in life, it was grades and sports, and then it was college and law school, and then it even became personal pursuits like getting married, becoming a mother, and then it became building a career, first as a lawyer and then as an activist and then as a writer. And I had just achieved this major professional milestone in my writing career. I had been published by the New York Times, and it was this big goal that I had set for myself, and I did it in record time. And when it finally happened, I felt nothing. And so I literally Google searched, what does it mean when you achieve a major goal and you feel numb? And this article entitled, "Are You an Unhappy Achiever?" was the first search result that popped up. And it was just this gut reaction, this instant awareness of, yes, I am. And I realized that unhappy achiever was a lens through which I could view pretty much my entire life, from early childhood to midlife, because early on in my childhood, I learned to earn love and approval. through doing good things, right? Through being a very good girl. And I think that that's the case for so many of us. Without even realizing it, I defined myself by what I did instead of who I was.
Mm. So in terms of getting getting good grades and getting rewarded for that and being told how you look on the outside perhaps or what college you get into, is that sort of what you're talking about, all these kind of things on the outside that are defining us? Is that sort of what you mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up even appearance, because that was a big one for me. As, a child, I was called chubby and I was teased for my weight. And I lost weight in junior high school, and immediately it was like my life changed. People suddenly saw me who
Hmm.
hadn't seen me before. My social circle changed. I became an athlete. And so in my adolescent mind, it was like, this is what I have to do to be accepted. This is what I have to do to be seen and loved. And so it sort of compounded even the track that I was on, in terms of, like so many others, being a good girl and getting really good grades and exhausting myself to do good things, because that was what my self concept was based on. That's what my sense of self was based on. And when your sense of self is based on the external, it
Hmm.
is so fragile, right? It's subject to anybody's criticism, anybody's disapproval, anybody's unmet expectation. And so in my late 30s, I realized, viewing my life through this lens, not only had I been running through my life, going from one thing to the next, and never actually finding that feeling of fulfillment or satisfaction or joy or self love that I had been searching for, scouring for my entire life. And not only that, but I didn't know myself at all, because the me that I had created was based on outside expectations, perfectionism, approval. And so
Hmm.
it was an image of myself, but it wasn't really me. It wasn't authentic. And I didn't even know who me was. And so I had to set out on this internal journey of figuring out who I was again, and unburying her beneath all the masks of expectation.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that. So you get this article, I mean, you're presumably you don't talk a whole lot about this in the book, but I'm guessing you were a fairly successful lawyer. You had this career, that you had this trajectory you were going down, and then a writer. You get published in the New York Times and you feel nothing. Like, what happens then? How does that kick off this journey of self-discovery and finding that the Ashley inside?
Well, I think that was multifaceted. It wasn't just identifying that I had built a life from the outside in instead of the inside out. It was also the fact that an unexpected trigger sent me spiraling into repressed traumatic grief that I had buried 24 years before, when I was 13. And suddenly I was grieving as if it had all happened the day before. And I truly didn't know what was happening to me. I thought something was wrong with me. I had no idea that, trauma that we don't deal with doesn't actually just go away. It lives
Right.
inside of us. And if something comes and triggers it, it comes spilling out. And so that was also a big part of going within. That took me from running around to down on the ground overnight, in so much, honestly, emotional pain and anguish, that I couldn't do what I'd always done. I couldn't just focus on things and stuff and busyness. I was broken down emotionally. And all I could do at that time was really breathe and be. And ironically, it was in that space of grief, of lost love, of suffering, of pain, in that darkness, that I started to really rediscover my light. And I started doing things like taking walks in nature. And really, it was just about taking time to myself to be in a way that I never had. And that was the place that I started to really crack open and figure out who this woman was, because I realized I did not know her actually.
Mm. Mm. And so you're ensconced in a life whilst you're cracking open. And so then this life has to change. I mean, it doesn't fit anymore. Is that fair to say?
That is very fair to say. And I'll speak to my own journey, but I also want to mention that in doing this work and sharing this book, I meet so many women on similar journeys. All of our journeys are different, but a lot of times the themes are the same. And so it didn't happen overnight, the changes. I had built a life, as I said, from the outside in, and I had to deconstruct that to build one that aligned with me from the inside out. But that was incremental over the past 4.5 years. And so it really started with the changes in my own career. When I started writing, I was writing political op-eds and very intellectual pieces because for me, that was very comfortable. I could talk about the world around me. I could not talk about what was going on inside of me. So intellectual pieces were a perfect fit. And as I started to come home to myself and open my heart, my work changed. I started writing personal essays and narrative pieces, real
Mm.
stories about my life. And interestingly, I started to have the biggest success of my career when my work changed in that way. And so the next step was I started to lose some friends in my circle that I thought would be friends forever. And that was deeply painful. And that is so common for those of us on this journey because we've changed. And even though the changes in us are really reflective of our own authentic being, sometimes to those around us, we seem like a stranger. They don't know
Mm.
that person. And even for me, I was like, these changes are so positive. I'm
I'm here. I've arrived.
it's like, I'm so much better than before. I can show up for you so much better than before. But again, they didn't know that version of me. That's not the version of me that they befriended. And so, some of those people left my life. And I'll say though, within 6 months, new people entered, right? And those friendships today are even deeper and stronger than the friendships that fell away were because I'm able to show up as me and I'm able to show up in my heart space and to be vulnerable and to really connect in my friendships and all of my relationships on a much deeper level. And, from there, I eventually ended up leaving my marriage of 15 years. I
Mm.
had met my husband, my ex-husband, when I was 23. And, most of us at 23 don't know ourselves, but but so that I never thought I would be a woman who was divorced. Never, ever saw that for myself. And that was the most difficult, painful decision of my life. But I realized, that my ex husband and I, despite the fact that we were beloved friends and co-parents, we couldn't meet each other in all of the ways that both of us needed. We couldn't connect in all of the ways that we could have or had the capacity to in the right partnership. And so sometimes loving someone looks a whole lot like letting go. And I think that for me and for him, that was the right choice for us. That doesn't always have to be the choice. And it isn't always the choice for a lot of women walking these sorts of paths. But for me, it became very clear that it was the right one.
Mm. So when new Ashley kind of arrives out of the shell, what is that like at first? Is it scary? Is it empowering? Do you welcome her with open arms?
I think it's funny. It's like the best way I can describe it is that you realize that the world before the change is you were viewing the world through like black and gray, right? And all of a sudden it's like you look around and the world is like technicolor, right? It feels magical and you feel energized. I mean, one thing I did like 2 years into the journey was run a marathon because I had so much energy. I actually needed an outlet, a really healthy outlet for it, because I wasn't carrying all of this unconscious baggage that I'd been carrying around for my whole
Mm,
life. And so the more that I began to heal and to grow and to transform, not the lighter I felt, literally and figuratively, right? And the more beautiful the world around me looked, and the people around me looked. And I'll say, as a woman who struggled with deep insecurity issues about myself, who I was, and my physical appearance for my entire life, suddenly I started to fall in love with the way that I looked. I started to really develop self love, loving and accepting my own unique beauty inside and outside for the first time in my life. And so I'll say I felt beautiful in a way that I never
mm,
had before, truly beautiful for the first time in my life. And it took until my late 30s and this journey to really start to feel that, because I think, as a woman who doesn't who doesn't have all American looks, I think that most of my life I felt that because I didn't fit a lot of those ideals, that I just didn't fit, right? I wasn't beautiful. And so this journey led me to really start to embrace all of me, from my physical appearance to my personality to all of the unique beauty that we all possess.
mm. I love that because how often are we allowed to say that as women, right? Where that, without there's just this thing that you don't talk about yourself or what you think about yourself because that's I don't know what the word even is, braggadocious or whatever, whatever. But it should not be. We should all be able to say, "I am beautiful. This is
Yeah.
why." And I love myself. Like there's absolutely, we need to normalize that. So thank you.
Yes. Yes. And I also want to say that, there's when we talk about getting to a place of embodied self-love, right? Which is ultimately, when I look at this book and this journey, that's all it is. It's a journey of coming home to self and self-love at the end of the day. And there's so much out there, right? And this is not to say that affirmations are bad. I'm not saying that. But for me, as someone who before this journey would do affirmations, right? I could have stood in front of the mirror and been like, I love myself. I am beautiful a million times, but I never would have believed it because I
Mm,
hadn't done the internal exploration, right? The unbecoming, as I call it, because I never had to become anything, but I did have to unbecome all of the baggage and the trauma and the BS that obscured, right? The beautiful being that I and all of us are when we're born. And so without taking that journey, there were I could have I could have sat in the front of the mirror all day and said affirmations, but I never would have actually been able to feel into that, because it would be like putting a band-aid on a gaping wound, right? I would
mm,
have kept bleeding out either way. That would have just been a band-aid, but it wouldn't have actually been the answer, given me the remedy, given me any relief, because I had to get at all of the underlying reasons I didn't love myself. And that we can only find inside of us, not with anything outside of us.
mm. I'm curious. So the decision to write about it, did it start out as a diary turned book? Was it were you writing just to kind of get it out and figure out who you were, and then was like, aha, this could be a book? Or how did you like when I I've done the National Novel Writing Month a couple times, and they always talk at the beginning of the month about, are you a pantser or a plotter, right? Do you fly by the seat of your pants and just sit down and write, and whatever comes that day, or do you have outlines and you work through it and you stick to what you say you're going to write? How was that process for you?
So what's so interesting is, this internal expedition that I was on, prior to that, I looked outside of me for answers. I looked outside of me always to know what to do. If I needed to make a decision, I went to every resource but myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just needed the right article, the right expert, the right friend, the right family member, the right mentor to tell me what I should do. And then I could do it. And the interesting thing is that when we turn within, we realize that we are our most trusted advisors, right? It is not to say that there aren't external sources that can be wonderfully helpful. And I certainly have a wonderful circle of wise women in my life who are incredibly integral on this journey that I've been on. But what I realized is when I started to reconnect with my own heart, I also started to reconnect with intuition. And I started to realize that I had wisdom inside of me, that I could trust me first above all else. And that when it came to my own journey and my own life, nobody knew more than me, that I should trust myself first and look to myself first for answers. And so to that end, I started to be guided by my intuition. And I started to come from a place of, faith and flow instead of forcing. Unhappy achiever is
Mm-hmm.
slogging and forcing and making things happen, right? And instead, I started to connect with myself and be in the unfolding of my life. I started to connect with my own inner intelligence, and then life got easier. Opportunities started to flow to me. Not to say that I didn't do anything, of course I still did, but I was working with in the flow of my life, right? Instead of trying to constantly figure it out from the outside. And so to answer your question, as far as writing that book, I was really in that place of connecting with my intuition and my inner wisdom and knowing. And so it wasn't like this big, I've been thinking about this a long time, and I think that I need to write a book. It was literally one day, and I had just taken about maybe a 5-month break from writing. And at first I thought I was going to go back and try to write another article for publication. And Megan, I'm telling you, it was just one day. It was this calm inner knowing of it's time to write a book. I have a story to tell, and it's time to write a book. And my next thought was, how do I write a book?
Yeah.
So I looked for some examples of books in the genre that I was writing that had been really well done and successful, just as a template to see how did this author structure their chapters, right? How is it organized? What do the parts look like? How long are the chapters? Just to get an idea of the structure so that I could start to fill that in creatively and build that myself. And I just started writing, and I never knew what I was going to write before I wrote it. A lot of times I didn't know. In fact, pretty much the whole time, I didn't know what chapter was coming next as I went. I would occasionally get chapters ideas, and I would just throw them into this. I had this document that was just a hodgepodge of chapter ideas and chapter names. And some of them got written and some of them never did, because I did not figure the book out. I followed where the book led me. And that was my process. As I said, I never knew what chapter I was going to write next. And here's the magic, Megan. I never had writer's block. It never stopped until it was done. And one chapter I would finish, and then boom, I knew what I was writing, and I would move right into the next chapter. And I think that that's the beauty of intuition and trust. It is really the place where the magic happens. And when we're meant to do something, it tends to unfold more easily and effortlessly than we can even imagine, or even what we're used to before when we were sort of moving through life a different way. And that was certainly the case with this book. I started it in November of 2021, and I wrote the last word of the last chapter of the first draft on August 5th, 2022.
Mm.
So less than a year, actually. And it was a beautiful process. And it really was I was writing it for the me that I was when I started this journey, and every person like her. And I was writing it as if I was dancing like no one was watching. I was pouring my heart and soul onto the pages, and I wasn't thinking about if anybody would ever read it. I was just writing the book that my heart needed to write, in hopes that it would help others on similar journeys.
That was going to be my question. Who was the audience? But for the moment, or in the moment, the audience is you and your own heart. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But now that it has come into this world, who are you finding? Who's it reaching? Where is it? Where is your baby going? I know authors often refer to their books as their babies, right? Where has your baby? Where have you birthed your baby, and into which realm?
It's so interesting because, as I said, I wrote it for the me that I was at 37, so 4.5 years ago. And so I knew her very, very well, right? But what's been so surprising to me is that, in terms of just age range, I have had readers as young as 16 say they needed to read my book, and as wise as 70 or 80. So the age range, it is,
Yeah.
there are people on this journey of all ages. So many people in their 20s even, that I've discovered. And I think to myself, especially when I see people much younger than me walking similar paths, I think, oh my goodness, what would my life have been like if I had known some of this in my
Mm.
20s? How different would my journey have been? And so it really brings me so much joy and gives me so much hope to see so many people taking these internal expectations of the heart for themselves so early in life, and frankly, so late in life, because it's never too late. We
Mm.
all deserve to live lives that light us up from the inside out and that reflect who we are, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Lives of joy, because, as a wise woman once said to me, when I was really in the throes of this journey and still sort of in that space of grief, which at the end of the day, all grief is lost love. This woman said to me, Ashley, you're beginning to understand that love is all there is. It's really all there is. And it's the greatest legacy that most of us can leave behind. And so for me, this book and everything that I do is about building a life of love, from my family to my friendships to my work to a romantic partnership one day. How can I create the highest levels of love in my life in every single aspect? And so I'm grateful that I get to do that with this book. And it hasn't only just reached, although I wrote it from it's a very feminine book.
Mm-hmm.
And so although I certainly wrote it with, anyone who embodies the feminine and identifies with the feminine in mind, I'll say I've had multiple men say to me that there was so much about this book that they could relate to personally, and that it was needed for them too. And so my reader is anybody who finds themselves on a similar journey, walking a similar path, and needs to know that they're not alone, needs to know that they're not crazy, and that there's nothing wrong with them for wanting to make changes, big or small, in their lives. And that if one marvelously mortal woman can do it, then they can do it too.
Mm. Mm. I want to ask a couple questions about the book itself and what's inside the book. And I know there's that famous quote by Anne Lamott where she says, "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better." And I don't want to talk specifically about stories about the people that you write about in the book, but you do write about, your mom features pretty heavily in the book, especially in the first part, your ex-husband. What was that like, right, to write about people who were a part of your story like that?
I think that that is the difficulty as a nonfiction writer when your purpose is to share real stories about your life. It's almost impossible to write them without including, right, some of the people in them. And for me, my guiding light is always that I only include other people in as much as I need to be able to tell my story
Mm,
fully.
hmm.
And when I do so, it is my job to tell the truth, but also from the most humane, compassionate place and giving everybody grace because I am not perfect. And I think the book features that as well. And and so neither is anyone else. And that's okay. And so nothing is shared with an intention to hurt or to harm. In fact, I believe that we're all given gifts. And I think that our gifts are superpowers. And, with great power comes great responsibility. And I take my gifts and what I share with the world very seriously. It's sacred to me. And I fully believe that if I were ever to use it with an intention to hurt or to harm someone else, it would be taken away from me. And it should be, frankly. And so I take being extremely thoughtful and compassionate in the way that I tell my stories, especially when I'm speaking about others, very, very seriously. And so I really did my best to tell the story while still highlighting the fact that everyone in the book, like me, is magical, messy, and in between, right? We're all doing the very best we can. And when we know better, we do better. And none of us are victim, villain, good, bad, right, or wrong. So that is the space and the place from which I write about anybody in my life.
Yeah. And what was, is it safe to say they've read it? Do they get an advanced copy? Do they read it before it comes out? Do they get the chance to edit out anything? Or is this your story and therefore you're just going to own that?
So everyone in the book had the opportunity to read it before it was released because that felt like the right thing. They should get to see it before the
Mm.
rest of the world. And I'll say my ex-husband read basically every chapter of the book as it was written. So there was nothing surprising to him whatsoever. And yeah, so yes, absolutely. Everybody had the opportunity to sit with the book before the world was sitting with it.
Mm. And, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask was how do we help create environments that kind of prioritize our well-being and not this unhappy achieving life? And I wanted to ask that in terms of your own children because you are a mother of three kiddos. That's
Yes,
right.
yes.
Like how are you doing things differently? How has this shaped your mothering, your ideas of what motherhood should be?
So it is impossible to change and not have every aspect of your life change too, including motherhood. And I look back at the mother I was before and I'll say, unhappy achiever. Megan, I poured myself into mothering. And that woman was working day in and day out on behalf of her children and her husband at the time. And there were many days and many years where there was nothing left for her. There was nothing left of her. But I would have said, I'm a good mother because everything I do is for my family. And yet, that version of me was suffering. She
Mm.
was carrying so much baggage from her past. She was physically present with her children, but she wasn't fully emotionally and spiritually present with them. She didn't know how, right? And she couldn't play. She was so serious
Mm.
all the time. And her emotional intelligence was was the best that she could, but it's nowhere near the version of me sitting in front of you today. And also, she was so hard on herself. She was so
Mm.
mean to herself. She didn't know how to give grace. She didn't know what really matters at the end of the day, which is love, whether it's love for yourself or love for your children. It's all love. And so the way that I'm able to show up today with my kids, I'm able to be really present for them. And I love my children and I would lay down my life for my children, but I don't live only for my children anymore. And I think that in so doing, I do them a service
Mm.
because it's a lot less pressure. Nobody should be someone else's reason for living at the end of the day. And I am able to meet my children in a level of love and compassion and grace and emotion and open heartedness that I wasn't before. And I am much more myself in every possible way. And so I am much more the mother that I want to be in every possible way. I am not perfect. I am perfectly imperfect, as I always say, and trying to find time to take care of myself and live a balanced life, especially as a single mother, while still ensuring that my children's needs are always met and that I'm showing up for them in the way that I want to, is something that I'm always working on. And sometimes I probably get it right. And sometimes maybe I don't, but I let my children know and I check in with them regularly and let them know that I'm always doing my best. And at the end of the day, I don't expect perfection from my children. I just expect them to try their best. And so I think that that's okay. We do not have to be perfect mothers. In fact, we will never be perfect
Mm.
mothers because we are not perfect people and we are ever evolving, right? I am an ever evolving woman and I am an ever evolving mother. And every time I know better, as Maya Angelou would say, I do better. And the same applies to my children.
Mm. Are they like, yeah, we love the new mom? Have you heard them make comments or have they do you feel like they've noticed a difference?
Definitely. I'll say this, one thing that my son said to me in the past few months that made my heart very full is we were driving home and he said, Mom, you are the most profound person that I know. And I
Mm.
said, Ari, what do you mean? And he said, you are a really, really good person. And
Oh.
it was a beautiful moment because, it is not easy, Megan, to take a journey like this as a mother of three. There have been many times where I have asked myself if, my children were getting what they needed from me. But I also realized that if I hadn't taken this journey, I wouldn't be showing up as this version of me doing the things that I'm doing that have caused my son to say that. And it is not about me being profound or good. I don't really care about that, but I do care deeply about leading a life of love in which I make everyone I interact with, from my children to a stranger on the street to an amazing podcast host, feel seen and loved. And we have the opportunity to do that every day in every way. And that's the life I want to lead. And that's what I'm doing with this book. And that's what I'm doing here with you. And that's what I'm doing with my kids.
Well, and I feel like it's just so relatable. Like I'm going to quote you if that's okay to read back from your book. But on page 63, you say, existing is exponentially more difficult when you're so vulnerable to the opinion of others. I spent a lifetime using achievement, perfection, and kindness to avoid criticism. And I think we all do that. That is so relatable, no matter if you're a man or a woman, if you're probably more so if you're a woman, honestly. But, like you say, I'm sure men feel that too. But just this idea that disapproval from other people destroys us. And I'm curious what you would say, and particularly even now in these times with young women and social media. And I mean, this is probably, thank goodness, social media wasn't around when you were a kid and going through your years of awkwardness and people calling you chubby and I can't even. But now it that's still happening today, and now it's happening, and we're capturing it, right? So, like, how do you share this message that you want? And I guess the question would be, what would you say to young women today if you're talking to, say, a group of middle schoolers or high school girls? What's your advice for them?
My advice to them, I would sum up first in one sentence. I would say, may they always remember that they are beloved, not for anything they'll ever do, but for their own beautiful, breathtaking being. Because that is the truth. The beautiful beings they were since they were born. That is the truth. Everything externally, the expectations, the images, the standards of beauty, it's all noise. And as I say in the book, it's a system set up for most of us to fail, because the standards are standards that even those setting them, I believe, know full well that most of us could never meet, right? No matter how much I try, I'm never going to look like Jessica Simpson, Britney Spears, or Christina Aguilera. And those were the images everywhere, right? When I was coming of age. Blonde, buxom, blue-eyed, very all-American looking. And I immediately felt like less than, no matter how many times I put bleach in my hair and the blonde highlights pulled through the cap that we all have.
Oh my God. I have in my notes, we have to compare perm stories. That part made me laugh out loud. Didn't we all have that? Like, what I have is not good enough. I need to sit in a chair with these curlers. Good Lord.
Which, yes, especially for a woman who has naturally curly hair. So it's a very interesting idea. But yes, it is a system that's based on consumption, right? And so we need to feel like we are inadequate, we are not enough. There is something that needs to be fixed, changed, tightened, trimmed, tucked, nipped, cut, sliced, Botoxed, whatever it is. The society, the culture that we live in is a capitalist culture, right? It thrives when people spend money, and people are willing to spend money when they feel like there's something about them that isn't good enough. And if they could just have this one thing, right, they will be good enough. And what I want to say to every woman and girl is, not only is there nothing else for you to be, beloveds, but there is nothing that you need to buy to be anything other than your beautiful, unique self. And for me, self-love came when I realized that the more I had tried to fit a box, right, this box of beauty that I was sold, the less beautiful I was, because the me I was born to be shines from the inside out. And the more I started to shine from the inside out, the more I started to love myself on the outside, right? And the more I embraced the beauty I was born with, and the more I embraced the beauty that I was born with, my dark hair, right? My almond-shaped eyes, my olivey skin, my unique face. I started to fall in love with me for the first time. And so I don't want any young woman or girl to wait until almost midlife to finally start to appreciate her own unique beauty. We were never meant to be carbon copies of one another. We never were,
Mm,
right? And so beauty is not one thing. It is not one standard. It was not one look. It is not one magazine cover. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and it is in the eye of the beloved. Be your own beloved
mm. Ah,
first. You will find beauty and see beauty in yourself and others like you have never seen before.
mm. Yes, I feel like this will be a great episode for women with young daughters to share,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can hear this message. You talk about, towards the end of the book, you talk about finding things that delight you and that we as women need to do that. And you're learning to play the guitar. Is that right? Talk about delight and why you brought that up in the book.
Absolutely. So I always tell those who are sort of rediscovering themselves and coming home to self and remembering themselves, right? To think about what they loved to do when they were 8 years old. Because often when we were 8 years old, we did whatever we did without a boss on our backs, without worrying about other people's approval or expectations. We did it for joy and joy
Mm,
alone. And so I always want to be clear with people that this journey of growth and healing and transformation doesn't need to lead you to a therapist sofa. It doesn't need to lead you to a yoga class. It doesn't need to lead you to necessarily any of the things that we traditionally think of when we think of healing, right? It certainly can lead you to those places, but it could also lead you to play guitar. It could also lead you to rediscover painting because you used to love to paint, or to start writing again, or to take the improv class you've always thought about taking, but never dared to try or carved out the time and space to try because you thought, well, I'm not going to be a stand up comedian, right? And I'm here to tell you that if you are doing something because it brings you joy, it is absolutely worth doing, because it is not just something you're doing, it is something that is lighting up your being. And that can be the most powerful road back home to yourself that you'll ever take. And you never know where that might lead. So I'll say I've taken an improv class, and it led me to meet, some people who've become instrumental to me in my journey. So it wasn't just about the fact that I took this class and I got to be silly with, 13 strangers for 2 hours every week for 8 weeks and felt effervescent and got to play and have fun. It was also about the fact that I met people who are precious to me now, right?
mm,
So you never know where that one thing might lead you. It could lead to meeting somebody who is beloved to you. It could lead to a new job. It could lead to a new idea that completely changes and transforms your life. So try, play, let yourself be. If it is for you, it's worth it.
mm. I love that. I love that. You had a friend in the book tell you that you have a hard time being present. So maybe this is not a fair question to ask because you're trying to just stay present. But I do want to ask, I see behind, listeners can't see this, but I see behind you, you have something on your wall that says daydream believer. You say in the book that dreaming is your superpower. And so I'm curious what you're working on, what comes next, what's still on the dream radar for Ashley.
I think that's such an interesting question because it's sort of, tugging at a growth edge for me right now. Because, when I think about unhappy achiever and sort of getting off that hamster wheel of moving from one external accomplishment or milestone to the next, I think that even now I have to be careful, because as
Mm,
soon as I start thinking about a future dream, I'm pulling myself out of the present moment. And on some level, I'm saying that where I'm at right now isn't enough, right? That I need to get to that place where I've found my life partner, or I need to get to that place where I'm achieving this next professional milestone. And it's really easy to trick ourselves into going that place under the auspices of, well, I'm just, dreaming, or this is healthy striving. And sure, absolutely, there's nothing wrong with healthy striving and dreaming, and that's a part of myself that will probably always be on some level. But at this point in my life, I'm much more concerned with accepting where I am in this moment and being at peace with that as I move forward, and also not wishing that I was in a different place, because for me, walking the path I'm walking, and for so many others who are doing the same, we are not walking the straight road. We are not walking the linear path. We are walking the path of the unknown. And so sitting in this space of the unknown, of unfolding, can feel terrifying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because 4.5 years ago, my life was set. I felt like I knew where I was going to be in 5 months, 5 years, 15 years. And now sitting here before you, I cannot say that. I don't know. I am in the unknown, and I am following my heart and my intuition and the unfolding of my life. And I'm creating a non-traditional life and a non-traditional career that doesn't fit any of the boxes that were originally prescribed for me. And I think in order to do that in the way that is the most peaceful, it has also called me to surrender every expectation that I ever held, and even to not attach too closely even to my own dreams. Because there's one thing I've realized, and that is, when we are in the space of the unknown, we have to be careful about even attaching to our own dreams, because our dreams are based on what we know. And sometimes what we know is so much more limited than what can unfold for us, and what the universe can bring to us. And so I've released that. I'm not attaching to dreams, and I'm opening myself to all possibilities. What is coming next for me, and enjoying this moment of just being here with you, and having a book to share.
Love it. Love it. That was not a trick question, but you, if it was, you answered it correctly. Although there's still a podcast about women who are living the dream. So maybe that's your example of a woman who is living the dream right now. The last question I always ask women is, because this is a podcast about women and Milwaukee women, who is inspiring you in this city?
Megan, there are so many women who inspire me in the city. And this is something I really want to say. I grew up in Northern Illinois. I never had any idea that I would live the majority now of my adult life in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And this is the place I've lived the longest of any other place. And there are so many incredible, powerful, dynamic, badass women in Milwaukee. And so I'm not surprised that I landed here at a time when I was writing a book like this, because I am so blessed each and every day by the fact that, first of all, I had the opportunity to write and share this book, and that in doing so, I have the opportunity to connect with incredible, amazing, inspiring women every single day, every single week. And I can't pick just one, because there are so many. And I'll say, one of the things that I'm most proud of, and the question that I sometimes get asked is, these journeys can be so hard, right? When we have to go through some of these changes, initially, we have to grieve the death of aspects of ourselves and parts of our lives that we attached to and identified with deeply. And that is brutal at times, and devastating. And so I get asked, what would you tell women who are on this journey, and why would you tell them to keep going, and to find the courage, right, to make these changes for themselves when their hearts are calling them to do so? And what I would say is, because at 41 years old, single and unpartnered for the first time in my life, I've never had more unconditional love in my life than I have today. And that is because, partly, at least in part, because I have been able to create relationships with women unlike any I have ever experienced. I did not know sisterhood, true sisterhood, 4.5 years ago. And now I have so many incredible women around me, wise women, powerful women who, have held me, frankly, when I've been down on my knees in this journey and offered whatever I needed, right? And not because they had a biological obligation to do so or because they owed me something, but just because they love me. And that level of sisterhood is just as soul fulfilling and nourishing as any partnership will ever be, because I fully believe that love in any expression is just love. And so the love between women, the love between soul sisters, and creating that with so many beautiful women in my life is honestly one of the greatest privileges and blessings, but also one of the things I am most proud of in my life. I get to be in the company and the presence of so many incredible, kind, open-hearted women on a regular basis, and they have helped me move my own path forward in so many ways. Their wisdom is the reason that I'm here with you.
Love it. So if you're listening in Ashley's Sisters, you know who you are.
And they know there are too many to name.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Ashley, I am in awe of anyone who can sit their butt in a chair and put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and write a book. So, oh my goodness, congratulations. And thank you for sharing your story so that more women can get out of the trap of being an unhappy achiever and really live into what we're meant to be here, right? Joyful and authentic. And as you said, badass women.
And free. We are meant to be, all of us, every woman is meant to be completely, unapologetically, forever free.
Amen. I think we just got to end it there. Thank you, Ashley, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Megan. It was an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
All right, listeners, I happen to know that Boswell has copies of this book on their shelves. If you were inspired by this conversation with Ashley Jordan, get yourselves down there, pick up a copy, grab a cup of coffee next door or down the street at Stone Creek. There's so much coffee on the east side. And spend an afternoon on yourself. Give yourself a treat. Dive into this book. One thing I didn't mention to Ashley, but that I really enjoyed about the book is that the chapters are short and sweet. They're sort of a memory of hers or a story, and then the lesson learned, and then some questions that sort of can trigger some personal reflection. So even better if you've got a journal that you can bring with you and read and write and just treat yourself to a day of self-love. I was wondering at the beginning how we were going to get through the interview without revealing the inciting incident or the thing that triggered a lot of this emotional and spiritual journey for her. And we didn't. So, listeners, there's still a lot to look forward to if you get yourself a copy of this book. But I will say that while this book is obviously Ashley's story and Ashley's journey, it really is universal. How many of us grew up needing that approval of others or doing things for the approval of others, to be liked, to fit in, to hang with the cool kids, right? Whatever we did as those awkward middle schoolers do, that's universal, right? And how many of us had that experience that we were crushed or humiliated when, I don't know, we wore the wrong shoes or we said the wrong thing, or we were friends with the wrong kids, right? These feelings of just needing to fit in, of wanting so desperately to belong, that supersedes one woman's story, and I think is a part of all of our stories, unless you were superhuman somehow in those early years. And I think it's even harder now with social media, with Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and all the things that show other people's lives seemingly glamorous, seemingly gorgeous, and leaving us in that state of comparison and FOMO. And so I think we have to work even harder at this idea of just loving ourselves for who we are because we exist, because we are beloved, as she says. So this would be a great episode to share with the young people, young women in particular in your life. This will be coming out before Valentine's Day, so it might be a great Valentine or Galentine gift to send to somebody that just needs a little reminder that it's okay to be a badass. All right, I will put links to the book and Ashley's website and places that you can get copies of the books locally, as well as any tour dates or anything that she might have coming up. I'll be sure to keep those fresh in my stories or really on my newsletter. That is where I communicate and where I will be communicating even more in 2025 rather than the socials. So if you are not already signed up for my newsletter, please hop over to creamcitydreams.com. Sign up for that. Make sure you're on it so you can find out how and where and when to meet Ashley and any of our other guests in the wild. I'll be back next week with another Milwaukee woman living her dream in the Cream City. Until then, Milwaukee, keep on dreaming.